Faces in the attendance list and in the chat. Uh, I hope everyone is having a great afternoon. So my name is Justina Kanza. I am the founder and CEO here at Granted. I'll do a little bit more of an introduction about myself as we go through the session, but I wanted to really lay a foundation on what we're doing, why we're here, and a lot of it will be data and research, qualitative and quantitative, around what the grant seeking space looks like. I won't spend so much time on that because I know everyone, I can safely assume everyone in this call has lived experiences with these challenges that we're trying to solve for. I always start these presentations with this big number, the $37 billion. I'm going to try and put it in the chat and just have folks put it in the chat. What do we think this number represents? Just to make it a bit more interactive, $37 billion. What do we think this number represents? I see some familiar faces. Thank you for joining, Stacy. So what do we think this $37 billion represents? I see Daisy has already gotten it. Grants available. This, absolutely, Daisy, this is the amount of funding that's available every year to founders, to nonprofits, and different opportunities here in Canada alone. And this money is left on the table every year because the grant seeking process is. These are some of the problems that I personally, being a nonprofit leader, because I run a nonprofit organization called Okura Academy, these are problems that I have faced. These are problems that I imagine if you're on the call, whether leader, founder, an innovator, a creator, researcher, I imagine you've identified these problems as how time-consuming and fragmented and complex the grant-seeking process is, right? If any of this is sounding familiar, I'm going to need you to send some reaction so that I know I'm talking to the right crowd. How impossible it feels understanding what the funders are looking for. Anyone ever experienced this? Discovering grants feels like you're trying to find a needle in a haystack. And we will learn later on that there's so many resources available and databases available where you can search for grants, but finding the right grant that fits your objective, that fits the organization you're building and stuff like that is quite challenging. So this is a problem that we're trying to solve for here at Granted, and this is a problem through this call and our expert panel discussion that we'll have with Elisa, that you get to learn how to navigate this this systemic challenge. And the cost of inaction is very immense. Like, I don't have to really get in detail and explain it to folks on this call because we have lived it, right? Wasting 20 to 40 hours per week grant related activities. I have spent on one grant alone, I kid you not, like a whole week writing just one grant, and it wasn't even like it was a lot of money. It wasn't over 50K. And oftentimes then, because of how fragmented and complicated the process can be, we try to find grant writers and experts to support our work. And while there's lots of great ones out there, and one of our panelists, Julissa, is an expert grant writer and consultant, I know how also challenging it can be and how high these costs can be, especially if you add on the intersectional piece of being a minority or marginalized, where for Black folks, for example, there's only 2 out of 300 grants that are going to Black-owned businesses, and women getting only 4% of funding in of business funding in Canada. So this cost of very, very huge. And that is, again, what we're trying to solve for here. And so on to the next piece. What does our agenda look like today? So we're going to start off with a little bit of an expert panel discussion where we get to understand, specifically from myself and from Julissa, who's my co-panelist, to understand where to find this funding, how to write a winning grant proposal, managing funder relationships, amongst many other things. But the most exciting part for me, quite honestly, is also getting to show you what we've been building with our platform, Granted. It is close to ready for everyone to have it and to access it and to use it as a solution to these grant-seeking challenges. And as part of a thank you for being on this call, We also do have an exclusive launch offer for Fox, so stick around to the end so that you can access this offer. And without further ado, I'll do a little bit of an introduction of myself and then pass it on to Julissa to introduce herself as well. And then we'll go through a 20-25 minutes conversation around some of these pieces that I've already mentioned. So as we're talking through it, I know some questions will come up. So please drop them in the chat and we'll monitor the chart as time goes by. But we'll also have a 5 to 10 minutes Q&A session shortly. And so, as I mentioned, my name is Justina Kanza. I am the founder and CEO of Granted. I come with a background of being a nonprofit leader. I've been running my organization, Okura Academy, for the past few years, but I've also served over 5,000 entrepreneurs in my work at U of T, University of Toronto Entrepreneurship, and the Black Founders Network. And through all of these experiences, I've seen how challenging it is to get an idea off the ground with non-diluted funding. And oftentimes we've had to bootstrap our initiatives, which again slows down the impact and the reach and even the profit that is well deserved from these innovative ideas. And so just this annoyance of having to answer the same grant questions over and over again, the annoyance of having to use 10 spreadsheets to track the grant deadlines even, is what led me to build a solution to this problem. But I am joined today by the lovely Julissa Brown, who is a global leader in advancing systems change through social finance, impact investing, and community empowerment. Julissa has over 7 years of experience in enhancing diversity and equity within Canada's social finance and innovation ecosystems. She's been pivotal in the governance and mobilization of the Federal Social Finance Fund, if you've heard of it. She sat on a lot of grant juries, if you will, so the folks that are deciding who gets the funding. So she sat on a lot of those, and she's also the former director of the Table of Impact Investment Practitioners, where she contributed to the development of Canada's impact investing landscape. And now she leads Funding Impact, which is a hub that equips entrepreneurs like ourselves here with the funding strategies, and co-founded also House of Nine Sorority, which is where I met her a few years ago, supporting Black women with the self-mastery and sisterhood that's needed to navigate complex systems like the one we live in. So without further ado, Julissa will come here to the stage, say hello, and further introduce yourself beyond what I've shared.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me, Justina. I'm so glad to be here. That was a great intro. I think in that space where I was leading impact investing for Canada, I was representing Canada in a lot of global spaces in Turkey and others. And I think like my experience in that is why I came back to support Black and Indigenous communities, because there was older white men talking about this $75 million they were raising, but being annoyed that they were only at 25 mil. And I was like, my community is still trying to figure out how to get this small micro grant. So let me take what I'm learning, back to my own community. So glad to be here with y'all.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you, Julissa. And you've actually just set me up for success with a perfect segue into my opener question. You talked about non-marginalized folks, non-racialized folks receiving so much funding, while our communities, marginalized communities in particular, are still struggling to get the 2K micro grant or the 10K grant. I imagine that some part of it is a mindset issue. So I wanted us to start first with the understanding of the grant-seeking mindset and reframing of it also. So many founders see grant applications as a chore, rightfully so, because the process is so complicated and complex. But what's the strategic mindset shift that people need to approach funding not as a burden, but as a core part of their growth strategy?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say that the answer comes in two parts. The first is that as people, there's already so much trauma related to finance in general. And so I think that like the first piece is for us to wake up a little bit and understand that we can actually put strategy behind our money to make sure that it works for us in all of the different ways. So definitely that part also, of course, in all the things that we do in business, we got to believe in what exactly it is that we're doing and fully understand what it is that we're doing so that we can best articulate that for others to understand.
Absolutely.
um and the last thing I guess I'll say is something that I was just saying on TikTok the other day, because somebody was like, you know, uh how do we basically, the notion around how Black communities don't get the type of funding that we need. And I was like, in addition to us, finding the funding that is for us,
Mm-hmm.
written diversity, like they're trying to hit a diversity marker, also recognizing that all grants are for us. Anything that is aligned with your sector and your mission is for you, regardless of if it says it's for Black entrepreneurs. So, just stepping out of that mindset of, feeling like we have to exist in a box, and still going out and reaching for the opportunities that everyone else does.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I like that distinction because I have, and I say this all the time, I think I have been a victim of, not a victim, I guess, but I have been a perpetrator, if you will, of really just going for the grants that say Black led or Black this, Black that. And to some extent, it is a function of the sector that I serve in, maybe because my nonprofit serves Black folks. But even beyond that, there's a lot of funding opportunities out there that might not be labeled as Black or as diversity, but are still aligned very well with the mandate of my organizations and of my projects. But on top of that, I would also add that part of what I have seen in my own experience and just talking with a lot of founders and nonprofit leaders in particular is that the mindset that we have to shift from is from seeing grant writing or just grant seeking in general as panhandling or as begging, but and then move to seeing it as a partnership building opportunity, right? You're not really just asking for a handout. You're building a project that has impact, that has profit, that has reach. And funders have a mandate to really co-create these partnerships that lead to the said impact. And so your job is not, you're not begging when you're writing grants. You're really creating a strategic partnerships that helps them funders as well achieve their goals while you achieve yours. So it is almost like they're making an investment, and the return on that investment is the impact. The return on that investment is the reach, and in some cases the return on that investment is directly the profit that they get from it. And so when you start to see grant seeking in general as a core business function, just like sales, just like marketing, you then start to treat it with the seriousness and the strategic thinking that it deserves. You start to build systems around it, and then you start being intentional with bringing value propositions and unique value propositions in particular to funders that get you granted. But with that said, Jalisa, my next thought here and my next question for you is, having created equitable access to funding, when it comes to the first step, right? Because it's one thing to now, like, we've changed our mindset. Okay, now I'm ready to start treating grants really seriously. I hear a bit of an echo. Okay, there we go. Yeah, to start treating grant seeking seriously, what is the first step to finding these opportunities? I know the task itself can seem overwhelming. Where are folks looking for these particular grants? Where should leaders be looking? How can they identify funders that truly align with their mission?
Yeah, so you can definitely, I mean, now we have a resource right in front of us that we're about to learn a little bit more about today. But in addition to that, I always say start with Google. Google's our best friend. I mean, and now ChatGPT and all the other platforms can really help us with that. But I always just simply put out a search that includes my sector, my location, and the year. So I might say youth grants in Canada 2025. I might say grants for tech in Ghana 2025. If you have a more specific ask than that, I would put that specific ask in the Google search. You'll get a lot of grant opportunities that are available. Some of them might have passed. Whether or not the opportunities are open or not, I definitely would say still figure out which foundations and organizations are directly aligned with your mission. So for myself, as Justina mentioned, I also run a nonprofit called House of Nine Sorority. We have a focus that's focused on women. And so the Canadian Women's Foundation is directly aligned, mission aligned with the work that we're doing. So, automatically I'm going there to see what grant opportunities are available, but also subscribing to their newsletter, because if there isn't a grant right now, chances are if they've had them before, they'll have them again. And now it'll come straight to my inbox. Um, so I'd say that is like my favorite way to look for grants. Funding impact, we also have a grant database. Now, granted has a grant database. There's really no excuse for not finding where the grants are. But I would say in addition to finding those grants, it's, understanding that, you don't have to apply for all of them. I think that we really need to take an assessment of our business and our mission, and look at some of the initiatives and programs that are already existing or that you already have strategies for, and sort of align those, because essentially when you apply for any of these grant opportunities, you're going to have to come up with some kind of project or initiative, right? And so at Funding Impact, we have grant writers, and so a lot of our clients, what we try to do is we let our community members tell us, hey, this is our main mission, but here are already the programs that we're running.
Mhm.
And so like we try to work with what's already there rather than trying to make up something fresh to squeeze them into a box that might not even fit, right? Because when you're going after these grants that aren't aligned with your business, you're essentially wasting time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I smile and laugh because of like I have done that before. I somehow found myself like creating a gun violence project because I wanted to apply for a gun violence grant, and I got the grant, but then I had to, because the application and the receiving of the grant is just, quite honestly, as time consuming as it is, a small part of that. What comes after that is you then have to execute and implement those projects, and that too is even way more time consuming. And that's why it's very important to have that piece where, okay, this is our organization, these are the activities that our organization does, and these are the projects that are attached to those particular activities. And then this is the grant and the funding that is aligned with this particular project, so that you're not having to go outside the scope of what your mandate is. It makes everything so much easier. And one of the things we'll talk about later is just being strategic around getting one grant is just a small part of it. A lot of these funders do follow on funding. And so you want to make sure you're doing a great job at the first grant so that you can then incentivize them to, follow up with the funding. But that's harder to do if the scope of the work that you're doing in the first place, one, is something that's not of interest to you. Two, it is very clearly outside the box of what your organization does. And I reckon there's some instances where you might have to create new projects to align with specific funding that you find interesting, but even that still has to be within the scope. But you've made a good point, Julissa, of like outlining what the current process looks like of going to Google and searching for these grants. And this is a process that I've used myself, but I still find overwhelming because of the amount of opportunities that exist out there. And even with those granular filters that you've mentioned, mentioning the year of the grant, mentioning the target beneficiaries, whether it's Black youth as an example, mentioning the location, it will still bring up a certain list of grants that you have to manually then go through and assess, am I eligible for this? Am I not eligible for this? And that's part of the pain point that we're trying to solve for here. And in a few minutes, I'll share a demo of our product to share you what our AI-powered grant discovery engine looks like. I also have our CTO on the call, so it'll be very exciting to also get some insights on the technical side of what goes into this recommendation engines. But I wanted to then follow up, Julissa, with the writing part itself, right? Like I said, funders receive a whole lot of applications. You've sat on grant juries and grant review committees. So from your perspective, shaping funding ecosystems, serving on these committees, what separates a good proposal from a winning one? And what are the key elements of a narrative that makes a funder say, like, we absolutely have to support this?
Yeah, the writing part of it is very important. And I'd start with the narrative that you're telling. Make sure that you understand what your business narrative is so that you can tell the funder the business narrative. And I think like the storytelling that goes behind you sharing what your need is, how you're solving that problem, the data that proves your need, and the fact that your solution is needed. Looking at the other funders that might be supporting your work, who your partners are, what your activities are. I think funders really like to know like what are the outcomes going to be, like how many lives are going to be changed, what areas are they going to be in, and like really speaking to that impact from like an outcomes perspective is really great. Funders also like to know like how you plan to measure your impact. So for anyone that's looking for information on that, you can search up impact measurement or program evaluation to gain some education on that. So I'd say like those are a lot of the main things for grant writing specifically. I'm trying to separate my business loan hat because that's just a little bit different, and I also sit on business loan review committees. But yeah, like you're right, Justina, like that's the narrative is so important, and the better that you do with the program, as you said, like the more funding gets dispersed. For House of Nine sorority, we ended up applying for $50,000 in 2021. We ended up receiving 40,000. We did so well in that program that first year that before the year was over, they topped us up and gave us an extra 10K. So we ended up with 50,000 overall. The following year, Canadian Women's Foundation said, all right, you guys did such a great job. We don't want you to apply to us. Now we're going to partner with you and 6 other organizations to apply to the government together. So we put through that application, received $300,000 for that over 3 years, but continued to do well and had the opportunity to build our program and, really put effort into our reporting and all that good stuff. And thankfully, we got topped up at another 70,000. So like being able to articulate the narrative and then also articulate the impact and should be able to prove that through the cycle, all very important.
Absolutely, absolutely. I always think of it as a map, and I wish I had like literally mapped it out into a visual, but I always think of it as mapping each activity that you're going to do in that program to a specific outcome. So if an organization or a funder is focusing on, for example, breaking into the workforce, like entry into the workforce, for example, what activity are you doing that is going to lead to that outcome and that particular funder priority, right? So it just comes down also with your narrative, because you can have the best narrative, but if it's not customized to who you're narrating it to, like then there's that disconnect. So it starts from also understanding what are these funders looking for? What do they care about? Which is something that ideally you should have done in your discovery phase so that you can see if there's that alignment piece. But I also really appreciate the point you brought up, which is around the proof of concept, which I find that sometimes is challenging, Julissa, because it's like the chicken and the egg. To show that, you've done the work, sometimes you need the funding. And to get the funding, you need to show that you've done the work sometimes. Granted, there's some, no pun intended, but granted, there's some instances where funders are specifically funding pilot projects. And one of the ways that I have found with specifically navigating that gap, it's pretty much the same with even like job search. You need to have a certain portfolio to show that this is the work that I've done, and always like start lean. Like, can you achieve the same, or can you do something related to the without the investments? Because if the need is so pronounced and so urgent, you as an organization or as a project lead or as an individual should have started doing some work around getting that need met. And so the funders meets you where you're at and comes in and helps you scale your impact. So that's another thing to keep in mind. But also really echoing your point, Julissa, on again telling the story of your outcomes and your impact and how that leads on to follow-up funding, because that's something that happened for us even with when I was working with BFN. I think one of the projects we worked on, the Black Career Advancement Project started on with like 200K at the beginning of the year. And we did such a great storytelling piece and really great impact from that program. So much so that at the end of the program, we invited the funders, they got to see the people that we've served directly. And again, that touches on funder relationships to the extent that few months later, they were able to provide follow-up funding and said, okay, here's an additional 800K to scale this project beyond what you've initially started with. But the challenge here that I'm also seeing is because there's a lot of resonance, a lot of customization that comes if you're dealing with, say, 15 projects and you have to tell a narrative that aligns with the funder priorities. And it's not really about, so how do folks who are wearing multiple hats navigate the challenge of this is the grant, and then I have to then make all these edits to make sure that the voice that I'm using is the voice that the funder, this particular funder, understands. And that's something that, again, I'll share in a little bit, something that we're solving for with our AI writing assistant, which really is designed to fill in the gap between this is what we have as a draft to really customizing that so that at least 80% of the work is done, and then you can save your precious time on even some of that strategic polishing pieces, as well as navigating those funder relationships. And then my next question here, Julissa, also be monitoring the chat for some questions as we'll have a Q&A session not long after this. Julissa, having written a whole lot of grants yourself, but also reviewed quite a few, what are some of the most common, easily avoidable mistakes that you see applicants make? And maybe sometimes they're not easily avoidable because it's such a complicated system. What are those small errors or oversights that can get an otherwise strong application immediately disqualified?
Okay,
Okay.
really great. But I feel like everyone's super quiet in here. Please drop a one-on-one in the chat box if you're picking up what we're putting down, because I don't want you to miss it. I don't want you to fall asleep either. So let me know that you're in here. Daisy, Jennifer, Wani, Nandi, Nikisha, Yvonne. Okay, you're here still. Perfect. Tracy, love it. Okay, so some of the mistakes I would say would be starting right at the top, not reading all of the guidelines. I think that reading the guidelines and every single piece of those guidelines is super important, because I've learned from personal experience, and I read this in a lot of applications, that when you don't read the guidelines, like you kind of disqualify yourself sometimes, like accidentally. So I'll give you an example. There was one time that I had applied for some funding, and we had a partner that we were working with, a program partner, and their side of the program was to do a conference. So we submitted it, everything was good. Like we thought we killed it, okay? After putting our hard time into it, we thought we killed it. We got denied, and we learned that on one of the pages that we didn't read clearly said no conferences. So yeah, I definitely would say read the guidelines. Another place that this guidelines and eligibility stuff might come up and stop you is in the preliminary questions of the grant. So sometimes grants are broken up into different sections, but you have to answer the preliminary, let's say anywhere between 1 to 10 questions. Sometimes they put this there to trip you up to see if you actually read it. So for example, they might say, does your program serve folks over the age of 29? And maybe your answer is yes. If your answer is yes, however, in their guidelines or eligibility, it says that the program can only serve youth under 29, you've automatically disqualified yourself. So I definitely say read all the guidelines, every line, it's there to help you. I would also say explain yourself in very clear, concise manner. Just because you understand the need for the solution doesn't mean that me as a reader understands the need for the solution. What you're doing could be solving a huge problem. However, if it's not clear, if it's not concise, if it's not clear, if it's not concise, if it's not clear, if it's not concise, 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 if it's not it's not my sector or I have not had a direct connection to that. Let me know if we're still here.
We hear you now, Julissa. You had gone
Okay,
off for a
perfect.
second.
Thank you. So yeah, you really have to like be clear, explain yourself, give that background, because just because I'm passionate about anti-Black racism doesn't mean my reader fully understands the historical context around cooperative economics and why it's important and why I'm running a SUSU and why I need them to fund me. Do you know what I'm saying? So make sure that you are being very clear and following those eligibility, reading all of the guidelines. Another thing that I would say could raise an eyebrow would be just not answering the question. I think that a lot of times when people that might not have as much experience writing a grant might see a question and think, oh man, I have to sound super professional and educated, and then they don't even end up answering the question. And then as a grant reviewer, I'm having to read the answer 5 times, and I'm not doing that. I'm just going over it because now we have 200 applications. Make me get it quickly, make me feel something quickly with that story, make me want to continue reading. Yeah, all of those, all of those gems.
Those are really good ones. Those are really good ones. If any of this is resonating, I want to see some more action in the chats, because these are really, really good, Julissa. I especially like the piece of like make, because they're human beings at the end of the day that are on the other side of your grant application. So make them feel something. And grant seeking, fundraising is essentially like sales. If you're selling something to someone, you want to hook them, right? When we're doing all our social media marketing, but it's always like, what is the hook? What's that one thing that will get someone interested to say, okay, I want to keep reading what this is. I also want to iterate the one you said on not assuming because you're the subject matter expert that the other person gets it. I would also go as far as to say like the use of jargon, especially like if you're going to use acronyms, break them down. Like if you use DEI, what is DEI? Always assume the person on the other side kind of doesn't get it unless it's a super, super technical grant application where that is non-language lingo. But even then, try to break it down as much as possible. And I've had, I think I have like my grandmother is a praying woman, so she's probably praying for me, because I had one instance where I wrote a grant application, and after a while I did some editing and I realized I had to change some numbers. So I changed it everywhere else, but I forgot to change it on the budget, right? I think I had changed how many folks we were serving, and then that messed up the calculations. And I submitted it as is, completely did not even catch that that was an error that I made, because it's, again, tedious work. And I was lucky enough that the person who was reviewing my grant application, from the city of Hamilton, I was lucky enough that the person called me. They were like, hey, you didn't fix your budget. And they gave me an opportunity to like go in and submit, or open it for you for another 30 minutes, go in and submit. But we don't always get this levels of luck. And it made me then reflect like, how many grant applications have I missed out on because maybe just the one number wasn't as accurate as it should have been. And not everyone had the grace to reach out and ask for an explanation, right? And so again, the tediousness of this grant pieces, from like understanding what the eligibility is, what the guidelines is something that if you're a founder wearing multiple hats, you're a founder dealing with like 10 grants, you're a founder that has to talk to investors, do your marketing, build your product, run your project. It's so much tedious work to do. You should be focused as a founder on your mission, on your product, on your users, on your impact. And some of this work takes away from it. And that's what racks up the 20 to 40 hours per week just writing a specific grant. And if you haven't got it already, again, this is something that we're solving for with Granted, and I'll be sharing that shortly. And then maybe a couple of last questions for us, Julissa, before we open it up for questions from the crowd. If you have any questions, I recommend you start dropping them in the chat now so that we can get to them in the next couple of minutes. Managing funder relationships, Julissa, because like I mentioned, the application doesn't end after you submit. The grant seeking process, doesn't end after you submit an application. There's the funder relationships you have to manage. There's a reporting piece that comes after that. So what is one best practice for managing that relationship that you have seen, whether it's like tracking deadlines for reporting, building long-term partnerships, exploring ways to partner beyond the core project that you're working on together?
You folks can definitely build relationships in a couple of ways. I would say, first of all, make them your friends because friends help friends out. By that, I mean not only like the coordinator that you're connected with, but the decision maker. I think that it's important that we meet with them periodically to make sure that they also understand like the grand scheme of the projects, what other projects we're working on, and like different and very specific ways that you can partner even deeper on projects, in addition to like what you have promised. So let's say I'm doing, some workshops, facilitating a cohort of workshops. I can still go to the funder and say, hey, you know what, can we partner in a deeper way? How can we work together on research? Because, obviously we are missions aligned and we're working on this research and we can really lean on you, foundation, to do this, heavier lift for us or XYZ. I think there's also always those type of partnerships. Building partnerships with folks that you have not received grants from yet is super important also, to let them know exactly what you're up to and how you can work together, because sometimes there's going to be opportunities there that don't exist to the public. So something that you propose, like you're able to strike up a funding deal through that personal connection versus there being like an open to public grant application. So that's always cool. To the person that you are, like the coordinator that you're actually working with, really just being real with them all the time, I think is important. That transparency level needs to be crystal clear because that person is always going to try to help you. For House of Nine, some of the funding that we received, so when we got the funding from the government, initially we were told that we were going to receive like the full year in a lump sum so that we'd be able to plan out our funding. But the government took so long. First of all, y'all, if you're getting government funds, don't hold your breath because whatever timeline they told you, they lied. Okay. So, anyways, by the time they finally rolled out the funding, they also changed their rule or whatever. They changed what they told us, and they now were saying that they wanted us to pay for our budget each quarter and then get reimbursed at the end of the quarter for what we had already spent. And to us, we're like, we're a nonprofit. The reason why we're getting funding is because we do not have a quarter's worth of money to spend to be reimbursed. So it's just not making sense. So we addressed this with our partner and said, hey, here's the situation. The partner really understood us and said, okay, how about we do a month at a time? Which for us is something that's much more feasible than doing 3 months at a time. So yeah, being transparent, having those conversations, letting them know, the other ways that you can work together, are definitely all great ways to build partnerships. And I'd also say, like, don't be shy to ask your funders if there are other funders that would be interested to join that partnership. I think that's another really great way to leverage the reputation of that foundation. Yeah, I guess those are the first few things that come to my mind.
Absolutely. Heavy on don't hold your breath. I am checking for a check at my door every day from the funding we got from the city of Hamilton. It's been quite a while. So if anyone is from the city here, please cash the check. But yeah, no, absolutely hear you. And I think part of it also goes back to the initial point we had made around the mindset, because I can see the fear of transparency coming from like, oh, this person is giving us money, and maybe if we go and tell them these are the problems we're going through, they might rescind the funding, or it might not look good on us. But again, as we had said at the beginning, it is a partnership at the end of the day, especially once that ink is dry and you've signed that, okay, you're giving us this funding. It is a partnership and everyone has vested interest in the outcome and the impact that you're working towards. And so as with any other partnership, if anything comes along the way, like, share it with them. And that for us happened to have been at Okwara Academy because we had received some funding that was meant to go towards hiring staff, specifically a hiring and training grant. And initially, it was communicated that like the funding would come up front, but then that wasn't the case. And the funding, we had to do the spend and then do the reimbursement, which is something that we didn't have the cash flow for, we didn't have the budget for, and we simply went to them and said, okay, like we can't really handle this right now. Can we either get the funding up front, or can we work together so that you guys are making the payroll directly to this training interns and stuff that we had. And in most cases, like they're willing to help, they're willing to find a middle ground, because at the end of the day, it is a partnership. At the end of the day, they're already sold on your story and they're committed to working together to deliver that outcome. And then my last question, and I'll open it up for questions from the chat, is let's leave everyone with one final piece of actionable advice. Julissa, if you were to do that, what's one single most important thing that everyone should do, whether it's this week or in general, to just increase their chances of getting their next project funded? If they forget everything else, what's the one thing they should remember?
Very good question. I guess the first thing that's coming to my tongue without thinking too hard is, in addition to seeking external funding, ensure that you have a business model that works. Because regardless of what sort of external funding that you have, your business still needs to be generating revenue for the time that when there's no external funding. Because I've definitely been in the situation where funding was flowing all nice and dandy, and then when the funding was over, so was the program. And our whole community was like, oh, what's next? When's the next? And we were like, wah, wah. Sorry, friends, we don't know. So yeah, in addition to any sort of external funding, also work on those bootstrapping elements, figure out how you're generating revenue. If you're a nonprofit, you're still able to create a membership even, there are ways to do that. So yeah, pay attention to those elements as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think very important note specifically for nonprofits is because sometimes people think just because you're a nonprofit doesn't mean you can't charge for your services, or means you can't generate revenue. You can. It's just that you can't use it as profit, right? It has to be reinvested into the community in that way. Really appreciate that, Julissa. I would add to the points that you've made as just one last piece of actionable insights to also systemize your story, like systemize your grant seeking process as with anything else, right? Because it is, again, a time consuming, a complex, a fragmented process, which works best if and when you have a strategy and a system that you work with. And so before you look for another grant, create what is your master narrative. And a lot of these questions are super repetitive. Like almost all the time, grants will ask you, hey, what is your mission and mandate? Hey, what are the core activities of your organization? Hey, what is a past experience or past experience you have to demonstrate your capacity to deliver on this project? So really document those things and make sure you have a master narrative so that every time you're writing a grant, you're not starting from scratch, because it is super, super time consuming. And with Granted, as I'll share in a little bit, this is one of the things that we've really created a system for, so that you're not starting from scratch. And our autofill function makes it so that when you're writing a new grant application, because you have that master narrative, about 50 to 80% of your application is already filled out for you. And you're just spending an extra hour, 2 or 3 hours going in and making those edits, customizing it, and adding those that brand voice, if you will, that aligns with the funder priorities. And so with that said, Julissa, thank you so much for sharing your insights. I'll take some questions from the crowd, so there might be some directed to you. So if we have questions, in the interest of time, I'll prioritize the questions in the chat. But if you do have a question outside the chat, just raise your hand. In the meantime, I see a question from Nandi who's asking, that they're based in the US and wanted to know if the funding you aggregate on your organization's pages is for US-based entrepreneurs or solely Canada-based ones. I'll say for Granted, for now, we're starting primarily in Canada because that's where, one, we as founders are located, but also where we see the most need for, as there is in many solutions for that. But Julissa, for funding impact, do you go beyond Canada?
Yeah, we support businesses all around the world. Y'all in here might not know, I also spend half of my year in Ghana because, in addition to the work that I'm doing here in Toronto, we're also reaching the continent to make sure that our business out there gets support. But we do have US clients here and there as well.
Amazing, amazing. And so I'll be happy to share Jalissa's contact information after the chat for anyone who would like to connect with her, particularly with you, Nandi. Is there any additional questions before we do a quick demo and review of what we've been building so far? Tola asks, do you have any particular advice for religious organizations as regards to applying for funding? Jalissa?
Religious organizations, okay, I definitely would pay very close attention to the eligibility, because there are some foundations and funders that do not give to anything religious, maybe religious organizations, religious initiatives. So definitely pay super close attention to that. If the eligibility requirements does not mention anything about, the restriction of religious stuff, I would still frame your narrative not to be 100% focused around the religion per se, but more focused on like the community impact that comes out of it. So let's say you have, you're doing a summer Bible study. Um, However, instead of just talking about, you're going to go through the Old Testament and the New Testament, and, I would talk about how, it's childcare relief for the parents in this underserved community, and, that the youth need structure and rites of passage, and, talking about the impact more in that way, if that makes sense.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, I'll jump to the next question from Jennifer as well. Jennifer, thanks you, Jalissa, for all the knowledge you've shared. And they're asking, does it matter when one applies during the application timeline? Does applying earlier provide a better opportunity for being funded?
That's a really good question. I would say, everybody that applies that meets the deadline gets read. However, from the grant jury perspective, sometimes it comes in two levels. Like, the majority of time, they'll let us see all of the applications as they're coming in. And then as a group, we start to shortlist the applications. So if you have applied, let's say not 1 hour just before the deadline, chances are in the weeks, prior, we would have had more time to read your application. So yeah, I guess, more time, more eyes, more grant juries, educators having eyes on your application with a little bit more time, it's always good. But, anyone that meets the deadline, you still end up getting read, maybe just a little bit more rushed. So yeah, I think also submitting ahead of time is a little bit more stress-free.
Yes.
So yeah, I'd always encourage that.
Absolutely. I think there's less prone to errors because you have a couple of moments to go through it and read through the applications and review. Whereas if you're chasing the deadline, in addition to being stressful, tech issues, guys, like there's a lot of things that happen close to the deadline because there's a whole lot of folks that are rushing to submit. And so sometimes like the portal just starts performing and you don't want to risk that. So in addition to the points that Julissa has shared, that's another thing to consider. Okay, we have 5 minutes to time, so I don't want to spend too much time on this piece. If we have any questions, any additional questions, please drop them in the chat, and then we can get back to them whether through email or in another way. But thank you so much, Jelisa, for sharing your knowledge as always and sharing your expertise and experiences. I find it super invaluable. Jelisa and I did a podcast, and maybe I'll share it as a follow-up resource in addition to any resources Jelisa might want to share. But yeah, take a look at the podcast episode Jelisa and I had. It was a whole hour of these conversations and then Sam, and I'll share it right after our call alongside all the follow-up resources. And without further ado, I'll kind of move on to the next piece, which is really tying together everything that we've talked about. We've talked about, um, sorry, can everyone hear me? A bit of an echo. Okay, there we go. Yeah, we've talked about the different challenges of the grant seeking process, and we've also talked about some solutions and how to do it strategically. But one of the things that comes to mind then is like, how do we do it? One, strategically, how do we do it in a way that systemized, but also in a way that is scalable? And that is one of the core principles of what we're building here at Granted, which if you're hearing this for the first time, which I hope you're not, is really an AI-powered grant management platform that is simplifying everything from grant discovery. How do you make sure you are eligible to a grant? How do you make sure you understand those grant guidelines, but also in the first place match with grants that are tailored to what you're offering, whether it is your organizational mandate or the different projects you're working on, in addition to like understanding what do these funders fund, what are their priorities, who have they funded in the past, so that you can, understand that if they funded an organization similar to me, they're probably likely to fund an organization like mine, right? And then the whole part of now writing the actual application, which quite frankly can be the most tedious, especially with the repetitiveness, as we've mentioned, of some of the data and narratives that you have to enter, and then comes the post-award tracking. So that is the platform that we have shared. I'll share my screen briefly. So this part will be recorded but won't be distributed after the call, just because we're still tweaking a couple of things and we want for folks to have the recorded version of the most up-to-date and the most perfect version of our platform. But I will ask for some grace because we're still, again, figuring a whole lot out. And we have this ready for folks on this call to access this week soon. And so for, again, a thank you for joining this call. You'll receive, I think Obed will put it in the chat, you receive 50% off of our services for the first couple of months, and this is what our pricing looks like. So happy to chat with anyone who would need additional support and insights into what the resources look like. But we've got a freemium version where you can just go in, still access different grant opportunities that you might not even access anywhere else. But for our basic users, you access the comprehensive database, which, as I mentioned, is a minimum of 1,000 grants available to you. You access the AI matching piece and recommendation engines we mentioned, the autofill feature, which does all the work for you and saves time, but also basic database about the funders. So seeing the funders, what they fund, who they funded, perhaps as well as how much they've dispersed in funding. But if you're part of our premium users, we can do advanced research for you on specific funders. So if you need, there's certain CRF forms that show how much foundations have given out in the past, what their giving patterns are, we can do that for you. And my favorite part, because I like one-on-one time with founders, especially, and with nonprofit leaders, if you're part of our premium users, you also get, in addition to everything that's been shared, you get up to three hours per month of strategy calls with our team. So if you need to strategize or you need help reviewing an application, we're able to offer that to you. And so again, if I think Oped has put that link in the chat, but as a thank you for attending this, please just click the link it has shared, as well as scan what's showing on the screen, the QR code that's showing on the screen, and it'll take you to a form where you just drop in a couple of details, and then we'll send you an email with your link to log in and access this exclusive offer. But yeah, this is what we're building. Again, I emphasize, like, this is quite frankly an idea that we started to conceptualize and really implement just 3-4 months ago. I think sometime in March is when we started doing the research to bring this to life. So it continues to be a work in progress, but also it continues to be something that we're building alongside you as our community. So if there's ever any feature that you're like, okay, this is not really working for me, or any feature that you would like to see, this is built for us and built by us, right? So we can co-build those pieces. So yeah, without further ado, I think I'll stop here and get some thoughts from the chat and see if anyone has any questions. Apologizing because also we're a little bit over time, but do we have any thoughts and questions here? I see some comments in the chats already. Beautiful, beautiful. Okay, Derek, I'm so excited that it resonates with you. Amazing. Beautiful. Okay. Do we have any questions? Thank you for all your congratulatory messages. Thank you, Tika. I see you in the chat as well. Jennifer, very excited to present this to my finance team. Thank you, Jennifer. I'll definitely be connecting with you as well. Amazing. Olga, I see a hand from Olga. Go ahead, please.
Hi.
Hi, Olga.
Hi, Jules. Great works there. Congrats, team. You're doing great. Sorry, I'm off camera because I'm still at work. But I just wanted to find out, do you have access to grants for like profit and non-profits as well as um, organizations based in Sub-Saharan Africa? And also just individuals are looking for grants for things like education and stuff like that.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you for that question, Olga. So first, right now, we're just starting in Canada. We do hope to expand beyond Canada. I see a question from Daisy as well around US. I saw Nandi had the same question. So part of our scaling plan is to really serve all those markets, but we're starting with Canada for now. We're serving not just nonprofits. You see grants for for-profits, a whole lot of them, and which is one of the myths because people think granting only exists for nonprofits. There's grants for profits. There's a lot of grants for artists and creative folks. There's grants for researchers as well, so folks in the education section. So all of those exist, and once you're on the platform, you'll be able to access it as part of the list of 1,000 plus. So not to worry. Did I miss any questions? So sub-Saharan Africa, Olga, not yet, but we'll be getting there. We'll be getting there. As part of what you might see, because I know, Olga, you also mentioned education. So you might see some of like the scholarship, fellowship funding that exists to individuals and researchers in Canada. And that's what we're serving for now. I see Tika's hand up as well. Hi, Tika.
Hey girl, congratulations. This is so huge. Congratulations to you, Obed. This is amazing, amazing, amazing work. And I'm so honored to know you and to obviously be a graduate of the Aquera Academy. I wanted to actually ask you about grant writing specifically, and I wanted to know if Granted eventually is going to have like a subsidiary where eventually you offer grant writing services to artists or people in the community, because that is definitely something that I do on the side, and I see it as like an extension, like a possible extension of the business, and would love to either work with you guys or propose that as an extension. I don't know if that was something that you were ever considering or thinking of, but I was curious about that.
Absolutely. So I think I only showed one side of our marketplace, but the other grant writer marketplace, maybe I can share this.
Finding grant opportunities across Canada and also in the US. So very grateful for you guys doing this work. It's not easy, and oftentimes it can be a thankless job, but yeah, it doesn't go unnoticed. Like, thank you guys so much for this work and compiling this data. It's really, really appreciated.
Thank you, Tika. Really appreciate that. Really appreciate it. Okay, if we do not have any other questions, I'm also recognizing we're over time. Just want to say a huge thank you to everyone for joining. I hope the part that Julissa and I were talking about was super valuable in really giving some insights on how to navigate the process. But I also hope that the tool that we've shared with you and that we continue to co-create with you continues to serve you and allow you to scale your mission and really allow you to focus on the things that matter in your projects and in your businesses. And please expect a follow-up email from our team over the next 78 hours with some of the resources that we've mentioned. And if you haven't already, Obed put a link in the chat as well with the form where you can go to access your 50% off, and that will be shared in the follow-up details as well. I will put quickly on the chat as a last piece my own contact information. You guys also get my personal phone number. So if you want to take a screenshot, send me an email, drop a message if any questions and thoughts come up. But we really appreciate you guys sharing space with us today and wishing you a great afternoon. I'll stay back in case anyone has any questions. I don't want to hold everyone back.